Okay, picture this. You're looking at a photograph, crystal clear, of a military tank rolling through a civilian protest. For most people, that image hits you like a punch to the gut. It's instant horror, right? Right. But what if? What if you showed that exact same photo to someone else and their brain just processes it completely differently in an instant? How is that even possible? Exactly. How can someone look at what seems like undeniable visual proof of an atrocity and their brain just rewrites the entire thing, turning it into an act of patriotism? All right, so let's get into it. Today, we are unpacking this incredible essay that explores that exact question. It really digs into the psychology, the cognitive dissonance, and the defense mechanisms that kick in when what the state tells you clashes with what you can see with your own eyes. And it focuses on this phenomenon of young pro-government nationalists in China who are sometimes called little pinks. But hold on. Before we go any further, we have to be absolutely crystal clear about something. The source material for this explainer deals with some incredibly sensitive and politically charged topics. And just so you know where we stand, we are completely neutral here. Our only goal is to report on the psychological analysis from the author's essay. We're not taking sides, we're not endorsing any particular viewpoint, we're just looking at the human psychology, the mechanics of belief that the author lays out. Okay, so with that said, the author starts with the very first line of defense the brain puts up when it sees something it doesn't want to see, just outright denial. It's that gut reaction to just dismiss the source of the information entirely. Yeah, the essay calls this the classic fake news reflex. When folks are shown evidence that completely shatters the official story, they don't even bother with the content itself. They just attack the person who showed it to them. They've been taught their entire lives that any negative report is basically a conspiracy, a manufactured attack.
Or they'll find another way out. They'll say, oh, the government's intentions were good. It was just some corrupt local officials who messed everything up.
But how does that even work when you're looking at actual video? I mean, that seems like it should be undeniable.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But you have to see it as a kind of extreme mental self-preservation. The author makes this powerful point, that the mind is literally fighting off what it sees as a virus. And that virus is the truth.
And this gets to the core of what the author calls the psychological immune system. Look, we're not just talking about someone changing their opinion on a political issue. If they were to accept the truth of that photo, they would have to accept that the moral foundation they've built since they were a child is a complete lie.
And that would be a total psychological collapse. The brain is basically hardwired to prevent that kind of trauma, so it will invent any logic, no matter how twisted, to protect itself.
But, of course, that psychological immune system isn't foolproof. The author points out that when the evidence starts piling up, when it becomes so overwhelming that you just can't deny it all, the mind has to switch gears.
Right, it can't just shout fake news anymore. It has to get a little more sophisticated.
Exactly. It pivots to deflection. The first tactic is minimization, treating horrible events like they're just isolated incidents, and then quickly changing the subject to something positive, like, yeah, but look at our amazing infrastructure.
Then you get moral equivalence, which we all know is whataboutism. The argument that, hey, all countries do bad things, so this is really no big deal. And finally, there's this profound fear of chaos, this deep-seated belief that if the government falls, society will descend into anarchy, which makes the current oppressive situation feel like the only safe choice.
And this quote on the slide just perfectly captures the feeling of whataboutism. It's that immediate defensive reaction, well, your relationship isn't perfect either. It's all about deflecting, about pushing the blame somewhere, anywhere else.
And what it does is it normalizes the horror. It tries to make it seem like everyone is equally flawed, so no one can ever claim the moral high ground.
So, okay, we've talked about the reactions, the defenses, basically the symptoms. But now the essay really forces us to look at the root causes, the disease itself.
Right, because you can't really get your head around these defense mechanisms without understanding the environment they were created in, this highly controlled, almost synthetic world where these beliefs are formed.
And the number one cause the essay points to is this total information vacuum created by the Great Firewall, which is then combined with nonstop conditioning from a very young age.
And it's not just that. School textbooks are carefully designed to turn historical trauma into a weapon, teaching generation after generation that the outside world is out to get them. And then you add the immense social pressure to conform. The bandwagon effect, where people just go along with the pro-government line to get by.
And all of this creates this really tragic illusion that they're thinking for themselves. People will hear a rumor and decide, okay, I'm going to do my own research. but their research is happening inside a completely sealed-off, censored internet. The author puts it perfectly. It's like being locked inside a rigged escape room. You feel like you're solving puzzles and making your own choices, but the person who designed the room has rigged every single clue to lead you right back where they want you. You never had a chance. And here's what's really twisted about it. The state actually uses people's own decency against them. It's true. A normal empathetic person has a hard time believing that anyone could commit such extreme evil on a mass scale. So when the state propaganda whispers, "You're right, that's too horrible to be true. It must be a lie," the psychological trap just snaps shut. And this all leads to what the author calls the climax of the argument. All of these systems, all this architecture we've been talking about, it all exists to build and maintain these huge, sweeping ideas the author calls grand narratives. And these are used to convince regular people to sacrifice their own well-being for the good of the state. And this is where you see this amazing contradiction that the essay points out. These same people can easily spot corruption or human rights abuses in other countries. The critical thinking is there, but it's like it hits a mental firewall as soon as they try to apply it to their own government. It just gets completely short-circuited by these big, abstract, powerful national stories. And that brings us to the essay's most fundamental realization. Ideas like the national interest are often just illusions, right? They're designed to protect the interests of the people in charge.
And it's always the ordinary people who pay the price. The grand story of the state's survival almost never lines up with the actual well-being of the human beings who live there.
But let's be really clear here. While this essay zooms in on one specific group, what it's really showing us is a universal human weakness. These tools of denial, this fear of chaos, disillusion of independent thought, that's not unique to any one country. That's everywhere.
Absolutely. This essay is like a magnifying glass. It's just showing us in extreme detail what can happen when a state gets the power to exploit these very human traits on a massive scale.
And that brings us to one last really chilling idea from the author. Because everything we've talked about is happening in our current world, where people are already willing to ignore physical, tangible evidence. So what happens next? In the very near future, when a state doesn't have to just censor the truth, but can actually generate a completely fake, hyper-realistic reality on command. We're talking about an era where historical video can be altered so perfectly that you literally cannot tell the difference. If a government can just manufacture its own visual reality, erasing its crimes and creating fake evidence of its triumphs, this is the terrifying question we're all left with. Will the very idea of objective, shared proof just become completely meaningless? You know, we like to think of truth as being as simple as a light bulb turning on. But what happens when the power grid, the wiring, and soon, maybe even the light from the bulb itself can be faked? What's left to trust? And that's where the essay leaves us. The next time you see something, anything, that just feels a little too perfect, or maybe a little too horrific to be true, maybe it's a sign that you need to look a whole lot closer.